we try to hold ourselves to that very high standard of treating that information well, of making sure that people do have access. So free expression and having more information out there for users to access has always been a core principle of what we do. Our view has always been, if what you want to do is maximize access to information, then you should, where people believe that there's information that's offensive or that they may not quite like, the answer is usually more information, so that you make sure you have it. More speech is always better than less. And so, we've never believed that sort of we go on our merry way and no one gets to question us, no one gets to talk to us. Far from it. We think that we've always been criticized by folks from the beginning for various things, and we do listen. We change things when we screw it up, because we do make plenty of mistakes. But on the topic of free expression, I think one of the things that we've done to make ourselves more accountable, in addition to hoping to make governments more accountable, is this transparency tool that you're seeing. The point of that, yes, is to show that there are governments who are making lots of requests for us to remove content or take down content, lots of requests of us for information about our users. And I think by shining a light on that, people will know that that's happening. But it also shines a light on us, right? To say that, and we're trying to, my view is that every time we're asked for, by a government for information or to take down content, I would like to be able to explain every instance, right? In as much detail as we possibly could. And we're a technology company. We thought maybe we should try to automate this in some interesting way. And so we have a couple iterations into it, and we're hopefully we're going to make that a lot better. So that's an example, I think, of us saying, no, don't just trust us that we're doing the right thing with respect to government requests. We're going to throw the information out there, and so people can see it.
And Google, of course, was one of the founding members of the Global Network Initiative, which I was also involved with launching, and that's again one of the mechanisms that you're trying to.
That's great. That's another great example of some. The point of Global Network Initiative is to have it's a multi-stakeholder organization. Human rights groups, NGOs, companies, and so for the companies who participate in it. The point is to make sure that we are being held accountable, that we're doing things that we're not, that we can get advice on the hard problems, and then at the end of the day, someone could look over our shoulder and say, "Did you do this right?" Or "How did you do this? How did you handle this problem?" And here's why we think you handled it, the right way or the wrong way, and we have to listen. So, our hope is that we can get a lot more companies to join.
Speaking of getting other companies to join, Richard, Facebook's come under a great deal of criticism, including from myself this year, over changes to privacy policies, the implications that have ensued for dissidents in repressive regimes, and for really kind of viewing the user from the perspective of the teenager in Northern California, as opposed to what the concerns and vulnerabilities might be of the user in Egypt or Thailand or elsewhere. And so I'm wondering what you're doing to try and address these public concerns, really about the trustworthiness of your service, and whether we might see you joining some of these initiatives like the Global Network Initiative and trying to work more directly with civil society to try and avoid doing the wrong thing.
Thanks, Rebecca. Well, I mean, describing how it feels inside the company, and a particular company like Facebook that's at this stage of its growth, I think the best analogy is that it's like a duck. We discussed this earlier. A duck sails serenely along on the water, but underneath, the feet are madly paddling, constantly correcting courses. And over both the issues of privacy and freedom of expression, clearly there's a set of external positions we've taken, but at the same time, on a daily basis, there are very intense internal debates, often triggered by commentators like yourself, triggered by organizations like EPIC, EFF, other organizations, as they give material to us, and triggered by our engagement with civil society. I mean, it is true to say that my presence at Internet Governance Forum last week and here this week is precisely to gain more input and to make more connections to help us define what we believe is the correct direction. Now, there is a challenge at this stage of development as to how much you share of your working while you're still working things out. And I understand the requirement for transparency, and we aim to do that in our finished products, our statement of rights and responsibilities. So our terms of service, which were very deliberately recast as a statement of rights and responsibilities, trying to define a relationship with our users that goes beyond standard terms of service, and with our privacy policy. I think we're still working through that process. How much do we share? How early on do we share? How much do we share about the detailed decisions we make about particular pieces of content? Again, like David, I think it would make our life a lot easier if we could share much more of the working. But again, you then need to think about the issues of scalability and the extent to which you can maintain many thousands of conversations on a simultaneous basis around a particular piece of content. It's something we need to address, but really is a challenge. Just finally coming to the point about the Global Network Initiative, I spent time with Susan Morgan last week, and it's great to see the GNI get a dynamic new executive director in place. You've done a fantastic job lobbying me today, and I've heard it from a number of different organizations. So the undertaking I've given, which I'm happy to repeat publicly, is that we will have serious consideration. I'll discuss with my policy team now the feedback I've had from IGF last week and this week, report back faithfully that there is an enormous value in GNI, that it's got tremendous support, and that we, Facebook, should look very seriously at how we position ourselves in respect of GNI.
All right. David, there was an interesting comment, a lot of interesting comments made in the last session from the room, but one comment had to do with the fact that you guys have global constituencies. Your global user bases are coming from all over the world, from people in all kinds of countries. And you have a lot of users who are in countries where they're not able to elect their leaders, or their leaders don't or some would argue their leaders aren't necessarily keeping their interests at heart when claiming to represent them at the UN or in other UN governance bodies or international governance bodies. And could companies like yours play a role in helping not only to enable these people to have a voice, but also helping them to participate in this enterprise that we're really embarking on, which is how do we keep the internet open and free and serving the interests of all of its users and not just certain ones? And can Google really help channel these constituencies that aren't getting representation through their own governments?
Well, I think we can help. I don't want to get too optimistic about what one company can do, right, to help in this regard. But I think our services are used by lots of users in countries where there's not a lot of democracy. Whether it's YouTube, whether it's Blogger, Google Search itself, and we try to make those things better and make them more usable for people who want to use them for organizing and so forth. And there's a lot of things we can do to help, and we're trying to figure out. And we'd love more recommendations from all of you about what kinds of things we can do. At the end of the day, governments have a lot more power than we do. One of the things we're really concerned about is their ability to switch our services off, and of course, which has happened in many places and is currently the case in many countries right now. So I think the answer to that is yes, but it wouldn't get carried away. I think there are a lot of things that I think governments at the end of the day are going to have to put pressure on other governments to get them to change and to get them to become more democratic and to get them to open up and make sure that they're not restricting the internet.
Richard, do you think there might be a way to develop kind of a multi-stakeholder process within Facebook's user base to get more participation and input from users around the world in terms of how your service evolves?
So I think there are kind of two questions which I would keep separate. One is around the governance of Facebook itself, and we did create a process for that last year. It's had reasonable levels of engagement, we think, for that kind of process. And again, I know we will be subject to criticism for the fact that there's not more engagement, but our experience has been that the kind of issues that excite users in very large numbers are actually around the visual design of the service. There's a fantastic group with quite a large membership. I hate the new design of Facebook, whatever it is. You know, that engages them. They're very engaged about whether the service remains free, which we've said it will permanently remain free, but whether or not, those are things that really engage lots of people. We speak with, we value the voices of the community who do engage around the details of the terms of service, but that is, in our experience, a much smaller community, and we'd like to build it out. I think the second part of that question, which is really about it being a platform for broader political and public engagement, is, to my mind, hugely exciting. The fact that services like ours are in more than 70 languages, learning a trick or two from Google's community translation to affect our own community translation, actually has really changed things. And again, the IGF, we were discussing this last week, we, in some of our services now, truly do have a multilingual internet. And in terms of participation, that's absolutely fundamental to getting people who otherwise wouldn't participate engaged. And we have got services now that roll out on platforms like mobile, reaching new audiences. And I would argue, you know, that we've created a compelling application that is bringing people into the internet for the first time. So I was talking to a representative from Kenya earlier who was talking about the impact there of Facebook in Kenya as the first application that makes you want to get up and get the internet. And once you've got the internet, then that opens up a whole new range of possibilities around finding information, around political participation, that I think will be hugely impactful.
Mm-hmm. David, I'm wondering, before we open it up, getting into the issue of your relationships with governments, of course, it's very complex, and you stood up to China, but then even the US, I was in a hearing with Nicole Wong, your colleague in Congress a few months back, and they were simultaneously praising Google for having stood up to China, and then beating up on her for not censoring YouTube adequately to combat copyright, yes. And then also calling on U.S. companies to work more closely with the U.S. government to combat the cyber war that is imminent. Yes, and so you know, you're facing a lot of interesting policy challenges on a lot of fronts. And what's interesting as well is something we talked about in the last panel, where governments, of course, are representing a geographically you know, set group of constituents. You've got a global set of users. You know, a European country might want to impose a particular law on you that makes sense for Europeans or Americans, but which might have unintended consequences elsewhere. And how do you get lawmakers to think more globally about the consequences of domestic laws on your service?
Sure. I mean, two different things. As to the first part of the question, in terms of the different kinds of pressures, yeah, there are governments who want us to do, in some cases, things that are actually contradictory, right? So if you look at, in Europe, actually, there's some countries, we get a visit from the data protection folks who say, you know, throw out all the information as soon as you get it. And then the next day, some law enforcement folks or folks who care about security walk in and say, keep this information forever, right? And it literally is from the same government, the officials from the same government who, you know, all of whom have authority. And you say, well, what do we do? So we run into that, you know, a fair amount. But in terms of the, you know, the global versus local problem, you know, that's been, you know, that's one of the reasons actually, you know, we're doing this, you know, is to make sure that we can, we sort of get people thinking about this at a higher level, because you know, if the problem you know, we started Google with a, you know, as I said before, you know, free speech as the default, right? But you recognize though that you know, when you know, and it sort of corresponds to an American, if you want to call it that, an American, you know, First Amendment kind of view. But as I said, it goes back to Google's core values. As we grew the company, as we expanded abroad, we realized that there are different conceptions of that, and governments, because it's their job to regulate what's going on in their countries, would like to you know, apply some of those kinds of laws. And so we, from the beginning of Google, have tried to figure out ways to sort of navigate that, while at the same time trying to to argue for some common standards. Now, we know how hard that is, but we've been trying to do that. I think one of the things that people, I think, is underappreciated in terms of how this problem's been navigated, at least with respect to search. You know, we could have had, you know, people been thrown, you know, locked in jail, or had situations where, you know, we wouldn't have wanted to comply with laws in certain countries, so we wouldn't have a service. You know, so people don't really appreciate the use of top-level domains, right, in sort of sorting this problem, and it's worked very well, actually, for search. So what am I talking about? Well, most people probably understand that when you're in your country, you know, Google automatically knows where, you know, from your IP address what country you're in, and so you're going to see, you know, here you're going to see google.hu when you look for Google. And so that's important for users, because users want to see something in their, you know, their local country, and so it makes sense from a user perspective. But it's also very important from a free speech and regulatory perspective, because what we've been able to do is to say, look, if your government doesn't like certain kinds of content, and assuming this is an elected government, you know, people in the country, you know, et cetera, then we will comply with those kinds of laws on that local domain, but we will not, you know, remove that information globally. Because
So
to remove it
Google.com.
globally means that you remove it for the entire world. And it's interesting because that's, from a government's perspective, you might say, well, wait a minute, that, you know, if all you can do is 2 clicks and you can get the information anyway, how are you complying, you know, with my law? But it's worked, and we've had almost no examples of governments trying, you know, when you tell them, yes, we've done this on the local site, but not on the global site, it usually is fine. And you know, I actually think it's kind of a good result in a sense, because it preserves the ability of the user to go see that content. Indeed, we even tell the user that if there are items removed from Google search, we tell them that it's been removed, and that's a cue to go look for it, say on google.com, if you really want to get it. And I think the problem we're seeing now is when you move into the sort of the more community space, or social networking, social media, where the whole point of the service is to go transborders, to have communities across national lines, and indeed it's harder to build those domains. And so most of, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Orkut or Blogger, and some of the sites we do, and of course Facebook, when you have a unitary site for the whole world, then it gets much harder to figure out how you're going to comply. And that's the conundrum we're in right now, and that's the reason, quite frankly, we haven't created sort of what we were able to create for search. We don't have an analog for the social media space. And so as a result, you have you know, places where in Turkey, where they're actually asking us to remove content for the entire world, and we've refused, and we won't do it. And there's no way to, you know, the only way to do this is with IP blocking, which is also somewhat distasteful, right? To have to, because then that eliminates the ability of the user to go find it somewhere else. So we don't like to do that either, although we have done it in a few cases. So it's a very tough problem.
Yeah, and Richard, as David alluded to, for you guys, this is even tougher. I mean, particularly this year with Pakistan and a number of other countries, you've been getting governments coming to you and saying, either, you know, if you don't block this particular Facebook group or this particular page or this particular set of content, we're going to block your entire service, and then you end up having, you've been, as I understand, sort of negotiating that in some cases. And could you tell us a bit more about how that works?
I mean, essentially, as David said, it is a unitary site, and part of the value that we think we bring is that we enable conversations between, if people want to participate, between groups in Scandinavia and the Middle East and Latin America and the United States, wherever those people are, they can take part in a single conversation through the service. So the idea of making that conversation inaccessible goes against our fundamental view of how we'd like the service to be organized. But again, as David alluded to, there are times when that becomes a necessity. And for us, it is essentially a choice of the lesser of two evils. Either to block that particular piece of content for that particular geography in order to, or risk the whole service going down. And those decisions have to be taken on a case-by-case basis. The starting point is a clear view that that content is illegal in that particular jurisdiction, but that's not the end point. It's understanding that it's illegal and then also carrying out our own review of the extent to which a blocking action would conflict with the fundamental aims and values of our service. And in some cases, that's resulted in the entirety of Facebook.com being blocked from particular countries because we're unable to meet any kind of requirement for specific items of content. In other cases, and we can take an example like Nazi content in Germany, where we have a very clear requirement under German law to make such content inaccessible in Germany. We can meet that requirement, and we have the clear legal basis under which we should be able to do that, should be required to do that by the German authorities.
We're going to go to the wider room. I'm going to pick on Mark Rotenberg, if you're willing to be picked upon. Your organization, EPIC, has been very active in challenging both of these companies on privacy grounds. I'm wondering if you have a comment or question.
Well, thank you, Rebecca, and thank you to the organizers. I may end up disappointing people today because actually it's not my intention to raise privacy criticisms. I wanted to start perhaps at a different point, and it has to do with a remark that Ambassador Aaron Krona made earlier. I think as we think about internet liberty and internet freedom, it is too easy to fall into the trap of trade-offs between rights and balancing competing interests. And my own view has always been that the better approach is a very generous view of liberty, one that's able to incorporate multiple rights. So, for example, internet freedom, opposition to filters, promotion of free expression, support for broad-based deployment of the internet, all of these things privacy advocates supported before either of your companies were incorporated. We see no conflict in supporting those efforts then or today. But I think we also need to think about privacy as a complementary right to freedom of expression, not something that we need to constantly trade off. But to do this, we need a good definition of privacy, because when we say privacy, we don't mean government secrecy, and I don't think you mean government secrecy either. And so we're in agreement that support for privacy is not a defense for government secrecy. In fact, there are areas of the internet where privacy and freedom of expression lock arms together. The right of anonymity, for example, enables freedom of expression by allowing people, many people here today, to protect their identity in circumstances where they need to do so. In fact, I remarked on the definition of privacy that was provided by the conference organizers that said, in order to enable the expression of viewpoints, certain parts of the conference room will not be photographed. That is the essential paradox of privacy. It enables freedom of expression. And again, on this point, I don't think we would have a disagreement. My second and related point, I was asked a number of years ago when someone spotted me on Facebook. They said, what is a privacy advocate doing on Facebook? Now, they might have wondered how they could reach me by the telephone. What was I doing with a telephone? But that was actually part of my answer. I said Facebook is like the telephone, it's like email. It's an enormously important part of communication. And we should use these new techniques, as many of the people in this room have, to pursue political activism. But in using these techniques also, we need to understand that they may be flawed and they need to be improved so that they can become more secure over time. So, Rebecca and David and Richard, I'm sorry, I really don't have any criticisms for you. I'm actually hoping that moving forward from this very excellent conference, there will be an opportunity to dialogue around freedom of expression and privacy in a collaborative way, because in fact for many years it has been a very important collaboration in the human rights field. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. So I've got another person to pick on, Sharon Home. Where is she from? Oh, there she is. Sharon was going to respond from Human Rights in China.
Is this on? Yeah? It says this microphone is being filmed, so I guess that's adequate notice, I guess. I'll put a bag on my head, yeah. I thought I'd say something about a rock in a hard place, and then I want to say something about approaches. That's a little bit widening the discussion a bit by, and then by narrowing it by talking about China. So first, between a rock and a hard place, I think that the rock is not as hard as it is feared or as it presents itself, or as monolithic. I think that's one thing. Secondly, when we think of rock, paper, scissors, what's the strongest is water. That flows everywhere when it's not restricted, and eventually it will wear down, a rock or any rock. So I think that, I would like to sort of, I hope Bob Borstein didn't come up with this title too, and now I'm taking issue with this title. It's like, okay. The other thing about place is that we think of that there are many hard places, and I think that's what the discussion all day has been underscoring, that the problems are very complex, and so there are many places. But despite what's going on actually in the discussion here in Budapest and in this conference, which is very nuanced and respectful and very rich, I have to share that in our interactions with companies, except for the GNI members, that's not the case. And what really happens is that I hear a lot, and I have to say cross sectors, cross companies, Fortune 500 companies, non-American companies, etc. And it's usually presented as an either or. They usually talk about a rock or a hard place. And what the rock and the hard place usually means is we either have to preserve our own market access or other things into the market, or we have to respect freedom of expression or privacy. Or it's presented as we have to comply with local law, or we have to comply with international law. I think that's the way we actually have it presented to us, and it's often echoed to us by media. When media asks us for comments, maybe it's being provocative, but that's what they'll say. They'll say, well, what do you expect for the company? Should Google leave China? I said, well, no, that's not a decision for NGOs to make. I think it's a business decision, but it's a business decision that must take into account all the impacts. So let me say three things about approaches then. It's relevant to China, but I think relevant beyond China. There's not one solution. I think GNI, we are also one of the founding NGOs, and we say there is no silver bullet. But let me say this. The Chinese government does have a comprehensive, fully detailed plan. And if you'd like to read it, I've got some copies of it outside. And so that plan was issued by the propaganda chief, who's also on the State Council. At the end of April, he issued a full plan, but it was not meant for you, because unlike the Internet White Paper, it was not issued with an official English translation. So we translated it, because we thought it was very important to know that there's a plan and about Internet management, etc. In the face of that, then when we say what are the different strategies that companies can come up with in conjunction with all the different stakeholders in the room. So I want to say three quick suggestions for just discussion. One is cross-sector, that we think about, just across all the sector because of technology convergence, but also because the challenges that a particular sector thinks that does not apply to them will apply to them, because the challenges catch up to you. So Cisco, I hope I'm not offending anyone in the room intentionally, but Cisco, for example, several years ago said, there are no human rights issues regarding our operations in China at all. We only sell routers. That's all we do, ma'am, routers. So they said, only routers. Now, what's happened in the few years? Well, it's not only routers, because they actually are in-country. They're actually certifying Cisco engineers, the largest cohort, perhaps, one of the largest cohorts in the world of Cisco engineers. So they're doing training, technical assistance, capacity building. So I think that. Now, the catch-up is that on October 1st, the new state secrets law will go into effect. So there's still time to assess the risks. So the state secrets law very consciously expands to everyone along the whole food chain and the internet, and includes mobile, and includes hardware and software, and it's quite comprehensive. But it does address the potential intermediary liability in a way that companies will not like. So unlike what's going on in Europe and other parts of the world where intermediate liability are getting different kinds of questions, in China, the law is going to say you are liable all along the food chain, whether you did the hardware, whether you did the software, whether you did the service provider, that not only are you liable, you will have a proactive obligation to report, take down proactively, and to cooperate with the prosecuting and investigative authorities. So I think this is a good example why it's good to, before the crisis hits, to do some due diligence and figure out like what will be the policy, what will be the operations after October 1st, what will your in-country employees do, what will, what will be the standards, what will be the guidelines. So I think that's one. The second thing is that a Green Dam was a good example of not solving the problem, but slowing it down, slowing down the train wreck a little. And that was because it was a convergence of interests of Chinese bloggers, of human rights people, of companies, of governments, of domestic Chinese companies, as well as foreign companies. It all came together for pushback.
Sharon, if I could interject, in case there's anybody in the room who doesn't know what Green Dam is without any context, it was a software that the government required that all computer manufacturers ship with all new computers, and were requiring to be installed in all cyber cafes, all schools, all public facilities, and so on. It basically had censorware and surveillanceware built in, and that's kind of the short, but not everybody knows what Green Dam is. But if you could just wrap up quickly, because I'd like to.
The second is to do a mind experiment, that usually when we hear a discussion strategically, when we do a deep dive, not from the 10,000-mile level, there suddenly becomes a different mindset about how we think about how to solve freedom of expression or how to protect it. Whereas if this were about trade or security or the WTO, in that context, some of the objections that we hear in the human rights arena just aren't raised. So for example, compulsory licensing of critical medicines. There's IPR, intellectual property rights, but absolutely, you can have compulsory licensing where your intellectual property rights are some ways affected. The second is that maybe in the mind experiment, if it weren't only about in the ICT sector, but look in the counterterrorism area, where best practices are being developed that include data mining and protection of privacy in the context of countering terrorism. And then finally, I just want to say something about working with civil society. This is a great leadership initiative between CEU and Google, so that it's not a one-off. In working with civil society, I think a lot of us in the NGO human rights world, we're very open to engaging, but what we also find out a lot is some of the companies do a one-off engagement, particularly when it's before an annual report or when it's a particular CSR initiative or a good citizenship or an environmental report. So then the NGOs are hauled out to come for a consultation. And then we always say it should not be a one-off because it takes a process and a commitment. And I do want to say Susan will talk, I think, more about GNI. But I think that's the process. And we've been at it for 4 years, and we're really only at the beginning. So I think that's the last thing to say, that it really takes a very, very long time. Thanks.
Thank you, Sharon. Before we get to more interventions from the floor, just want to see if either of you would like to respond to anything
Love to hear
that
more
was said.
from folks.
Okay. Susan Morgan from the Global Network Initiative. The GNI has been mentioned and invoked in various ways. We just want to give you an opportunity to reflect.
That's great. Thanks, Rebecca. And so I've been Executive Director of the Global Network Initiative for 3 months now, and I'm kind of getting that I've taken quite a task on here. I'm excited to be here for a number of reasons, but I'm going to pull out 2 things. I think firstly, the conversation and the discussion this morning really emphasised around the sort of issues that we're facing, the importance of multi-stakeholder dialogue, which is great. And the second thing that I'll just say briefly is that it's great to hear from Richard that GNI will be considered by Facebook. It's great. So I wanted the opportunity just to say a little bit about GNI and what we're aiming to do. We're a multi-stakeholder collaboration between companies, between civil society, academics, and investors. And we're really, I think I'd describe it as being engaged in a kind of process to understand how we can protect and advance freedom of expression and privacy online. So we know, and we've heard a lot today about the difficult challenges that companies are facing increasingly when they're faced with requests from governments to either block content or hand over data and information about their users, just to name two examples of the challenges that are being faced. So the GNI, over a period of years, developed a framework really to help companies in their decision-making when they're facing those difficult questions. The framework sets out the importance of really developing mechanisms and expertise within the organisation to help understand what the human rights risks are that the business are facing. I think there are three particular areas in terms of the markets in which they operate, the technologies that they developed, and the products and services that they're selling. And then underpinning that framework is a process of accountability, a shared learning opportunity, really within a sort of broad coalition and within a safe space. And then finally, we're starting to think through what are the sort of public policy engagements that we should be starting to make. We're young as an organisation. As I say, I've been here 3 months. We're looking to grow. So if anyone's interested in hearing more about the GNI, I'm around until the end of tomorrow. So please come and talk to me. I'd be welcome that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Do we have anybody? We've got some people lining up for the mic. Gentleman here.
I have a question for Facebook. It's basically regarding how a lot of Iranian government will go to an activist profile and then report the profile. And once it gets to a number of reports, Facebook will automatically close the profile. That's something automatic that will happen. But my question is, how can we get in contact with Facebook? You having more than 500 million users, it's really hard to find a live person. You get pointed towards a help section where you won't find any help, and then it's just a circle going around. So that profile with that many users and that much information just gets lost, and there's nobody to answer.
So I can answer in two parts. I mean, the first is just to try and dispel the view that Facebook systems work on automated number of reports. They don't. That was also raised this morning. The reports that come in are reviewed, and actually the person who's reporting, if they're repeatedly creating unwarranted reports, we're more likely to act against the person doing that than the person who's being reported multiple times, because we're very sensitive to the fact that people may try and use reporting to try and suppress freedom of speech. So they really don't work on that automated numbers basis. They'll work on a review of the account and whether there's a reason to disable or warn the user of that account. Having said that, I am aware that sensitive accounts are sometimes closed, and there are issues in particular if that sensitive account is the owner of a page, and with the closure of the account, the page is also taken down. And that's a real issue. These are the kind of issues that actually get circulated as part of the paddling duck every day for us to quickly try and get on top of. I would love to improve our channels so that we are able to get on top of that before it's become a really panicky situation. And we have a conversation going on right now about how we could do that, which non-governmental organizations or civil society organizations we could work with, how we can improve our responsiveness. It's not perfect, but I hope and I trust that it will get better as we become more sensitive to these issues. It's another thing, actually both from this meeting and last week's, that I'm taking back to my colleagues as a priority.
Thank you.
Jillian York.
Hi. There we go. Both of my questions are also for Facebook. Sorry to neglect Google.
No worries.
So,
We're the old thing, they're the new thing. They're much more interesting.
This is a bit of a two-parter, and so I'll just put it all out there. The first is that talking about Facebook and its multiple language translations, which is a wonderful thing, and I'm thrilled to see that Facebook is now offered in more than 70 languages. At the same time, Facebook's terms of service is only offered in 5 languages, maybe 7, I could be wrong. And so for me, what that means is that you've got a huge swath of the world using Facebook and agreeing to a terms of service that they may or may not be able to understand. And therefore, if their account is deactivated or content that they've posted is regulated or taken down, this presents a problem because perhaps they didn't know what they were getting into in the first place. So that aside, my second point is earlier today during the discussion with Shahzad, I don't see see him, but about the specific incident of the Drama Muhammad Day cartoons and Facebook. I think, and I don't want to get your words wrong, I think that what you said was that Facebook felt that that was an important dialogue to keep open, and whether or not we agree with that, what I wonder is, I've documented many instances of Facebook taking down other groups, be they the Boycott BP group, which was then restored, or a particular group in the Arab world to promote secularism, or even atheist groups in the Arab world. Some of these groups are never restored. And so I wonder, what makes the Drama Muhammad Day group a priority and these other groups are ignored? And I've raised this point to Facebook's Adam Connor before, and his response to me was that sometimes dolphins get caught in the net. I find that particularly disturbing, and I kind of hope that more is being done to ensure that we're treating all of these groups equally.
Sometimes dolphins get caught in the net.
Yes.
Wow.
This is a public event where this happened.
Thank you. The other reason for comparing myself as a duck was whenever you're sharing a panel with Google now, I found we're the kind of decoy duck that everyone fires at, which is why I think they invite me. To answer, it's a great event. To answer those two questions separately, in terms of languages and terms of service, I think actually we're now up to closer to 20, but you're right, it's not the full set, but we've just been extending the set of languages that we do the automatic translation for, consistently trying to do that. The second part is to say we've also started to try and create very simple versions which can be translated into more languages as well to give users the key points. So if you go to facebook.com/privacy, what you'll now see is something with pictures and illustrations actually in that larger set of languages. There's still the full detailed privacy policy if you want to read that, but you're getting something pictorial much more straightforwardly. Actually, the real challenge, I'd love it if anyone has ideas on how to solve this, is around video. We'd love to use video much more extensively for communication around policy, but the costs of translating video are significantly higher than the cost of translating text now that, I think I'm fading in and out, now that we have the community translation tools, because video requires quite heavy manual labor to dub a new track onto an old video. But we're trying, and we're just going to keep going in the right direction, I hope, with those numbers. In terms of decisions around content that's kept up or not, on that very specific set of content, and I personally found it extremely offensive and didn't like that piece of content, but because it had hit a certain amount of notoriety immediately, a conversation was held with the people who had put the content up there to try and establish an email conversation whether or not their intentions were, if you like, permissible political speech or were in the zone of hate speech. Through that conversation, it was established that, however offensive, the speech should be allowed to continue on the site. Now, that clearly received a lot more scrutiny than many of the other decisions that are taken because of the notoriety. Let's just be frank that when something hits the headlines, a lot of people are engaged in looking at that. Other decisions that are made, sometimes they're automated systems. As I explained earlier, in answer to a previous question, for example, a user's account has been taken down. Their account may have been taken down because they were sending excessive friend requests. An activist may send excessive friend requests for perfectly good reason, but it looks like spammy friend requests, or even worse, from our point of view, harassment friend requests. So the account may have been taken down and the page lost because the activist was being a good activist. And so the challenge for us, being frank, is how we can operate at the scale we need to operate at to keep the site safe, to keep the spammers and the harassers off the site, and at the same time identify genuine activity by somebody like an activist who simply misunderstood the rules or stepped a little bit out of line, and we should be making special efforts to protect them. That's an ongoing challenge. Again, it's something that we're paddling away at to try and refine the systems, but I'm very conscious that there are individual decisions we've made that are really important to people out there where they feel that we've treated them very badly. The only thing I can say again on that is where they are raised with us, including in blog posts about Facebookistan, those do get circulated, and we do dig into those accounts as much as we can to try and learn from any errors that we may have made along the way.
Great, we're running short on time, but we'll try and get through as many comments, questions as possible. This gentleman, then we'll go to you guys there.
This is Shivam from Delhi, and I have nothing short of anger and outrage to express about what Facebook is doing in India, which is, if you ask whether Facebook is on the side of free speech or on the side of those who are against free speech, in India, Facebook is on the side of those who are against free speech. To give you just two examples, one, there was a Pink Panties campaign against sexual harassment in India, a very famous campaign. I don't have time to describe it, but that account was hacked. That it was a Facebook group, and they tried, those friends of mine, they tried a lot to get in touch with Facebook. They contacted personal friends, just get in touch with anybody. Will somebody listen to us? No replies, no contact, and the group is still not restored. So the people who are presumably for that sexual harassment of women going to pubs have won because Facebook wouldn't listen to us. Second example is of a controversial journalist who, from the point of view of some people like me, spreads state propaganda. And so one Facebook group after another saying that we oppose his journalism is removed by Facebook every time he reports it. And it went to the extent of making it so soft as in his name, Asian provocateur. Even that was removed, you know. So anybody who, and there was no libelous content, there is no, it seems there's no reviewing of the content. Somebody says, here's a group against me, it's bad, remove it, and you remove it. On the other hand, there could be people dying in Pakistan because of Draw Muhammad, their group, and you wouldn't remove it because then you want to be on the side of free speech. So I think this is just plain hypocrisy, and the frustration on this side, and nothing short of sort of anger to express about it. Also,